She looked like any broke college student. When their plane started falling from the sky, military jets rushed to help. "We need to talk to Venom immediately," they radioed. Everyone stared at the quiet girl in 31F. Who was she really? Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Captain Sarah Venom Blake sat in the cramped economy seat 31F of Southwest Flight 2156, her laptop balanced on the tiny tray table as she worked on her doctoral dissertation. At 28, she looked like any other graduate student traveling from Las Vegas to Dallas on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2025. Her long brown hair was pulled into a messy bun, she wore a faded university sweatshirt and jeans with holes in the knees, and her backpack was stuffed with textbooks and research papers. The flight attendant, Marcus, offered her a small bag of peanuts. "Studying for finals?" he asked with a friendly smile, noticing the thick engineering textbooks spilling from her bag. "Working on my dissertation," Sarah replied quietly, not looking up from her laptop screen filled with complex aerodynamic equations. "Trying to finish before my defense next month." The businessman next to her, David Park, glanced at her screen and saw what looked like rocket science formulas. "Aerospace engineering?" he asked with interest. "Something like that," Sarah answered vaguely, minimizing the window that showed her classified research on hypersonic flight dynamics. "Just some theoretical work on advanced propulsion systems." What David didn't know was that the tired-looking graduate student beside him was actually one of the most classified pilots in the United States Air Force. Sarah Venom Blake held a top-secret clearance and had spent the last 5 years test-flying experimental aircraft that officially didn't exist. Her call sign Venom had been earned during her test pilot training when she had successfully completed a series of impossibly dangerous flights that had killed 2 other pilots before her. Her cover as a graduate student at MIT was perfect. To everyone who knew her civilian identity, she was just another brilliant engineering student working on advanced theoretical research. No one suspected that she regularly flew aircraft that wouldn't be revealed to the public for another decade. But Sarah was growing tired of the double life. The constant travel between her cover identity at MIT and her real job at classified test facilities was exhausting. She was seriously considering revealing her true identity and leaving the Black Project's world behind. Captain Rodriguez had been flying commercial aircraft for 15 years, but he had never experienced anything like what happened at 2:47 p.m. over New Mexico. Southwest Flight 2156 was cruising peacefully at 30,000 feet when every pilot's worst nightmare became reality. "Dallas Center, Southwest 2156, we have an emergency," Captain Rodriguez transmitted, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We're showing engine fire warning on engine number 2, and we're experiencing severe vibrations throughout the aircraft." Southwest 2156, Dallas Center copies. "Can you maintain altitude?" "Negative, Dallas Center. Engine number 2 has failed completely, and engine number 1 is showing abnormal readings. We're declaring emergency and beginning immediate descent." But the emergency was about to get much worse. As Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Martinez worked through their emergency checklist, a series of explosions rocked the aircraft. What had started as an engine failure was rapidly becoming a catastrophic system breakdown. "We're losing hydraulics," First Officer Martinez reported. "Flight controls are becoming unresponsive." In the passenger cabin, 137 people felt the aircraft shudder and shake as multiple systems failed simultaneously. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, and several passengers began screaming as they realized something was seriously wrong. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of an aircraft in serious trouble. Her pilot training immediately kicked in as she analyzed the sounds, vibrations, and movements that most passengers couldn't interpret. This wasn't a minor emergency. This was the kind of catastrophic failure that usually resulted in total loss of aircraft and crew. She closed her laptop and focused on what she could hear from the cockpit radio communications. The pilots were dealing with multiple emergencies at once, and their stress was evident in their voices. When Southwest Flight 2156 declared an emergency over New Mexico airspace, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, immediately began tracking the situation. A commercial aircraft with multiple system failures over the southwestern United States was automatically flagged for military attention. But this particular emergency occurred in one of the most sensitive airspace regions in the country. Nearby were several classified military installations, including test facilities where experimental aircraft were flown daily. Any aircraft emergency in this area required immediate military response. "Sir," reported Captain Lisa Rodriguez to Colonel James Mitchell at NORAD Command, We have a commercial emergency aircraft in the restricted zone Echo airspace. Multiple system failures, possible loss of control. What's the aircraft type and passenger count? Colonel Mitchell asked. Boeing 737, 137 souls on board. They're currently descending through flight level 280 and requesting emergency landing at Albuquerque. Scramble F-22s immediately, Colonel Mitchell ordered. I want that aircraft escorted and monitored. If it goes down in restricted airspace, we need to control the scene immediately. Within minutes, 2 F-22 Raptor fighters from the 49th Wing at Holloman Air Force Base were airborne and climbing rapidly toward the emergency aircraft. Major Kevin Razor Thompson and Captain Jennifer Hawk Williams were experienced test pilots themselves, chosen specifically for this mission because they were cleared to operate in the sensitive airspace where the emergency was occurring. Dallas Center, Raptor 1 and Raptor 2 airborne and climbing to intercept Southwest 2156, Major Thompson transmitted. Raptor flight, Southwest 2156 is descending through flight level 250 with multiple emergencies. Provide escort and assessment of aircraft condition. As the F-22s approached their intercept point, they prepared for what they expected to be a routine escort mission. But routine was about to become extraordinary. As the F-22 Raptors took position alongside Southwest Flight 2156, the pilots could see visible damage to the commercial aircraft. Engine number 2 was completely destroyed, and there were signs of fire damage along the wing and fuselage. Raptor 1 has visual on Southwest 2156, Major Thompson reported. Confirming engine number 2 is destroyed. Visible fire damage to wing structure. Aircraft appears to be maintaining controlled flight but is in serious distress. Meanwhile, back at NORAD Command, intelligence personnel were reviewing the passenger manifest for Southwest 2156 as part of standard security procedures for any aircraft emergency over sensitive military areas. Sir, reported Technical Sergeant Maria Santos to Colonel Mitchell, you need to see this passenger manifest. What is it? Passenger in seat 31F is listed as Sarah Blake. But when I ran her through our security databases, I found something interesting. Colonel Mitchell looked at the computer screen and felt his blood pressure spike. The graduate student listed on the passenger manifest was actually Captain Sarah Venom Blake, one of the most classified test pilots in the Air Force. Are you certain this is accurate? Mitchell asked. Confirmed, sir. Captain Sarah Blake, call sign Venom, currently assigned to the Aurora project at Groom Lake. Top secret clearance, specialized in experimental hypersonic aircraft. Colonel Mitchell immediately understood the implications. Not only was there a commercial aircraft emergency over sensitive military airspace, but one of the most valuable and classified pilots in the Air Force was aboard that aircraft. Get me a secure line to the F-22s, Mitchell ordered, and contact Groom Lake immediately. They need to know about this situation. Aboard Southwest Flight 2156, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Martinez were fighting to maintain control of an aircraft that was becoming increasingly difficult to fly. Multiple system failures had left them with limited options and decreasing time to reach an airport. Dallas Center, Southwest 2156, Captain Rodriguez transmitted, his voice strained. We're losing more systems. I don't know if we can maintain controlled flight much longer. It was then that a transmission came through on a military frequency that the aircraft's radio could monitor, a transmission that would change everything. Southwest 2156, this is Raptor 1. We understand you have Captain Sarah Blake aboard your aircraft. We need to speak with Venom immediately. In seat 31F, Sarah felt her heart stop. Her carefully maintained cover identity had just been blown by military pilots who somehow knew her real name and call sign. Every passenger around her was staring, confused by the military terminology they didn't understand. David Park, the businessman beside her, looked at her with growing amazement. Did they just call you Venom? Are you military? Before Sarah could answer, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Captain Blake, this is Captain Rodriguez. We need you in the cockpit immediately. We have an emergency situation that requires your expertise. The entire passenger cabin fell silent as they realized that the graduate student in the torn jeans was something entirely different than she appeared. Ma'am, said Flight Attendant Marcus as Sarah stood up, are you really a captain? It's complicated, Sarah replied as she made her way toward the front of the aircraft, leaving her dissertation behind for what might be the most important flight of her life. As Sarah entered the cockpit of Southwest Flight 2156, she immediately recognized the severity of the crisis. The instrument panel looked like a Christmas tree of warning lights, and she could hear the strain in both pilots' voices as they fought to control the damaged aircraft. "What's our status?" Sarah asked Captain Rodriguez, her voice instantly shifting from graduate student to military pilot. "Engine 2 is completely destroyed," Rodriguez explained rapidly. "Engine 1 is running rough and losing power. We've lost primary hydraulics and backup systems are failing. Flight controls are becoming unresponsive." Sarah scanned the instrument panel with the trained eye of someone who had dealt with aircraft emergencies in far more advanced and dangerous aircraft than this Boeing 737. Her experience test flying experimental hypersonic planes had taught her to rapidly assess and respond to multiple system failures. "How much fuel do we have?" she asked. "About 45 minutes at current consumption," First Officer Martinez answered. "Nearest suitable airport?" "Albuquerque is about 60 miles northeast, but with our current rate of descent and control problems, I'm not sure we can make it." Sarah made a series of rapid calculations based on the aircraft's condition, remaining fuel and glide performance. Her experience flying experimental aircraft that regularly experienced catastrophic failures had taught her to find solutions when conventional procedures weren't adequate. "We're going to make it to Albuquerque," she said with the confidence of someone who had landed aircraft in far worse condition. "But we're going to need to use some unconventional techniques." "Raptor 1, this is Venom," Sarah transmitted on the secure military frequency. "I'm in the cockpit of Southwest 2156 and have assessed the situation." "Venom, Raptor 1. Ma'am, we're honored to be working with you. What do you need from us?" Sarah's response demonstrated why she had been selected for the most dangerous test flights in military aviation. "Raptor Flight, I need you to coordinate with Albuquerque Tower for emergency approach clearance. Also, I need real-time weather and wind information for our approach." "Roger, Venom. We have you covered." What happened next was unprecedented in civilian aviation. A commercial airliner was being guided by one of the most elite test pilots in the Air Force, while being escorted by two of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah said, "I'm going to teach you some techniques that we use for emergency landings in experimental aircraft. These procedures aren't in any commercial aviation manual, but they work when conventional methods aren't sufficient." Rodriguez listened carefully as Sarah explained advanced flying techniques that were normally classified and used only for the most dangerous test flights. "Captain Blake," First Officer Martinez asked, "what kind of aircraft do you normally fly?" "The kind that don't officially exist," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. As Sarah worked with the Southwest crew to stabilize their damaged aircraft, the F-22 pilots were learning more about the woman who was saving Flight 2156. Back at NORAD Command, classified files were being reviewed that painted a picture of one of the most dangerous and important pilots in American military aviation. "Raptor 1, NORAD Command," came the secure transmission. "We're sending you classified briefing information about Captain Blake. You need to understand who you're working with." Major Thompson and Captain Williams received data downloads that made them realize they were witnessing aviation history. Captain Sarah Venom Blake wasn't just any test pilot, she was the lead pilot for the Aurora project, a hypersonic aircraft program so classified that most military personnel didn't know it existed. "Venom has more experience with aircraft emergencies than any pilot currently flying," the briefing explained. "She has successfully landed aircraft with total engine failure, multiple system breakdowns, and structural damage that would destroy conventional aircraft." "Jesus," Captain Williams whispered to her wingman. "Razor, do you realize what we're seeing? She's flying a commercial aircraft using techniques developed for hypersonic test flights." "I know," Major Thompson replied. "This is like watching a Formula One driver save a school bus." What Sarah did next demonstrated why she had been chosen for the most dangerous assignments in military aviation. Using techniques developed for experimental aircraft that routinely experienced catastrophic failures, she began teaching Captain Rodriguez how to fly a severely damaged Boeing 737 as if it were a glider. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah instructed, "conventional procedures assume you have normal control authority. We don't. So we're going to use energy management techniques that will give us the best chance of reaching the airport." She guided Rodriguez through a series of maneuvers that commercial pilots never learned, techniques for flying damaged aircraft that had been developed through years of test flights with experimental planes that regularly suffered major failures. "Reduce power on engine 1 to minimum," Sarah instructed. "We're going to use gravity and aerodynamics instead of engine power to maintain control." "But that's not how we're trained to handle emergencies," First Officer Martinez protested. Commercial procedures assume you're flying a fully functional aircraft, Sarah explained. When aircraft systems fail completely, you need techniques that don't depend on those systems working. The F-22 pilots watched in amazement as the damaged commercial aircraft began flying in ways that defied conventional understanding of how large aircraft should behave in emergency situations. Raptor 2, are you seeing this? Captain Williams asked her wingman. I've never seen anything like it, Major Thompson replied. She's flying that 737 like it's a glider, using techniques I didn't know existed. As Southwest Flight 2156 began its final descent toward Albuquerque, Sarah coordinated the approach with the precision of a test flight operation. She had the F-22 escorts providing real-time weather updates, air traffic control coordinating emergency equipment, and the commercial crew implementing procedures that had never been used outside of classified test programs. Albuquerque Tower, Southwest 2156 heavy emergency inbound, Sarah transmitted. Be advised, we are using experimental approach procedures due to multiple system failures. Southwest 2156, Albuquerque Tower. We have emergency equipment standing by. Runway 26 is cleared and ready for your approach. But Sarah knew that the approach would require more than just cleared runways. The damaged aircraft would need perfect conditions and flawless execution to land safely. Raptor Flight, Sarah transmitted, I need you to monitor our approach path and call out any deviations. With our control problems, I may not be able to detect drift until it's too late to correct. Roger, Venom. We're with you all the way down. As they descended through 10,000 feet, Sarah began implementing the final phase of her emergency plan techniques that had been developed for landing experimental aircraft with total hydraulic failure. Captain Rodriguez, she said, what I'm about to teach you isn't in any manual, but it works. We're going to land this aircraft using only engine power and aerodynamic control. The final approach to Albuquerque's runway 26 was unlike anything in commercial aviation history. Sarah guided Captain Rodriguez through a landing technique that had been developed for experimental aircraft that routinely lost all conventional flight controls. Power up slightly on engine 1, Sarah instructed as they passed through 1,000 feet. We're going to use engine thrust for pitch control since our elevators aren't responding properly. The technique was so advanced and counterintuitive that it had never been attempted with a commercial aircraft. But Sarah's experience with experimental planes that regularly suffered total system failures had taught her to find ways to fly aircraft that conventional procedures couldn't handle. Venom Raptor 1, Major Thompson transmitted. You're looking good on approach. Rate of descent is perfect. Thanks, Raptor 1. Rodriguez, you're doing great. Trust the technique and trust the aircraft. At 500 feet, a sudden wind gust caused the aircraft to drift left of the runway centerline. Captain Rodriguez began to panic, but Sarah's calm guidance kept him focused. Easy correction with engine power. Don't fight the aircraft, work with it. We've got this. The Boeing 737 touched down on the runway with a harder impact than normal, but Captain Rodriguez managed to keep the aircraft centered and under control. As they rolled out, emergency vehicles surrounded them, ready to provide assistance to any injured passengers. Southwest 2156, outstanding job, Albuquerque Tower transmitted. Emergency equipment is standing by. In the passenger cabin, 137 people applauded the safe landing, most of them unaware that they had just witnessed aviation techniques that were decades ahead of anything used in commercial flying. As Southwest Flight 2156 came to a stop at Albuquerque, the F-22 Raptors performed a ceremonial flyby, a tribute normally reserved for heads of state or fallen heroes. Major Thompson and Captain Williams wanted to honor the pilot who had saved 137 lives using techniques that most people would never know existed. Venom Raptor 1, Major Thompson transmitted. That was the most remarkable display of airmanship we've ever witnessed. You just redefined what's possible in emergency aviation. Thanks, Raptor Flight, Sarah replied. Just another day at the office. But it wasn't just another day. What Sarah had accomplished was extraordinary by any measure. She had taken command of a civilian aircraft during a catastrophic emergency and used classified techniques developed for experimental aircraft to save 137 lives. As passengers deplaned, many of them stopped to thank Sarah personally. David Park, the businessman who had been sitting beside her, was among the last to leave. I can't believe I was sitting next to a test pilot this whole time, he said. Why didn't you tell me you flew experimental aircraft? Sarah smiled. Because I'm supposed to be just a graduate student. At least I was until today. Within hours of the emergency landing, Sarah's carefully maintained cover identity was completely destroyed. News of the incident spread throughout military and aviation communities, and her role in saving Flight 2156 became international news. Secret test pilot saves commercial flight, read the headlines. Graduate student revealed as elite military aviator, wrote journalists who were trying to understand how a doctoral candidate had demonstrated flying skills that surpassed anything in civilian aviation. But Sarah's exposure created serious problems for military security. Her work on classified programs was so sensitive that her identity had been protected at the highest levels of government. Now that cover was blown, compromising ongoing projects and potentially endangering national security. "Captain Blake," said Colonel Richard Hayes during an emergency briefing at Kirtland Air Force Base, "your heroic actions saved 137 lives, but they also compromised some of our most classified programs." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied. "But I couldn't let those people die to protect my cover identity." "We're not criticizing your decision," Colonel Hayes assured her. "But we need to figure out what to do next. Your cover as a graduate student is obviously no longer viable." The military faced an unprecedented situation. One of their most valuable test pilots had been exposed in the most public way possible, but her actions had saved more than 100 civilian lives. 2 weeks after the Southwest Flight 2156 incident, Sarah received orders that would change her career forever. Instead of returning to classified test programs, she was being assigned to a new role that would utilize her unique combination of skills and her newfound public recognition. "Captain Blake," said General Patricia Martinez during a meeting at the Pentagon, "we're creating a new position specifically for you. You'll be the military liaison for civilian aviation safety, helping to transfer advanced military aviation techniques to commercial aviation." The assignment was unprecedented. For the first time, the military would be openly sharing some of its most advanced flying techniques with civilian aviation authorities, using Sarah's experience to bridge the gap between classified military programs and commercial flying. "Your actions aboard that Southwest flight demonstrated that military aviation techniques can save civilian lives," General Martinez explained. "We want you to develop training programs that will help commercial pilots handle emergencies using methods that were previously classified." Sarah accepted the assignment with enthusiasm. Her cover as a graduate student was permanently blown, but she could now serve her country in a new way that honored both her military training and her commitment to aviation safety. "I want to make sure that what happened on Flight 2156 doesn't have to depend on luck," Sarah told the general. "Commercial pilots should have access to the best techniques available, even if those techniques were developed in classified programs." 6 months after the incident, Sarah was teaching a special course at the Federal Aviation Administration's training center in Oklahoma City. Her students were experienced commercial pilots who were learning about advanced emergency procedures that had never been shared outside of military test programs. "The techniques you'll learn in this course," Sarah told her first class of airline pilots, "were developed for experimental aircraft that routinely experienced total system failures. These procedures can save lives when conventional methods aren't sufficient." She used the Southwest Flight 2156 incident as a case study, explaining how experimental aircraft techniques had been adapted to save a commercial flight. "When I walked into that cockpit," she explained, "I had never flown a Boeing 737. But I understood the fundamental principles of flight control under emergency conditions, and I could teach those principles to pilots who did have 737 experience." The airline pilots were amazed by the techniques Sarah demonstrated. Procedures for flying with total hydraulic failure, methods for using engine power to control aircraft attitude, and energy management techniques that could extend glide range far beyond normal parameters. "Captain Blake," asked American Airlines Captain Jennifer Wong, "why weren't these techniques available to commercial pilots before?" "Because they were developed for aircraft and missions that were classified," Sarah replied honestly. "But the Southwest incident proved that these techniques can save civilian lives, so the military decided to declassify them for emergency use." The training program that Sarah developed became a model for military-civilian cooperation in aviation safety. Airlines around the world began sending their most experienced pilots to learn the advanced emergency techniques that had saved Flight 2156. "Captain Blake's program has revolutionized how we think about aviation emergency procedures," said International Air Transport Association Director Michael Chen. "She's sharing knowledge that could save thousands of lives." The techniques proved their value repeatedly. Within a year of Sarah's program being implemented, commercial pilots using her methods had successfully landed aircraft with failures that would previously have been unsurvivable. We've had 3 incidents in the past 6 months where commercial pilots used Captain Blake's techniques to save aircraft that would have been lost using conventional procedures, reported FAA Administrator Susan Wright. Her program is literally saving lives. Sarah also continued her work with experimental aircraft, but now her dual role allowed her to immediately transfer new techniques from classified programs to civilian aviation safety. The barrier between military and civilian aviation emergency procedures has been permanently lowered, said test pilot Colonel James Miller. Captain Blake proved that knowledge developed in classified programs can serve broader humanitarian purposes. 2 years after the Southwest Flight 2156 incident, Sarah was promoted to major and assigned to command a new joint military-civilian test program at Edwards Air Force Base. Her mission was to develop and test emergency procedures that could be used by both military and civilian pilots. Major Blake represents a new model for military aviation, said Air Force Chief of Staff General Robert Taylor during Sarah's promotion ceremony. She demonstrates that our most advanced capabilities can serve both national security and civilian safety. The ceremony was attended by many of the people whose lives had been touched by Sarah's actions. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Martinez from Southwest Airlines spoke about how Sarah's techniques had been incorporated into their company's training programs. Major Blake didn't just save our aircraft, Captain Rodriguez told the assembled crowd. She changed how our entire industry thinks about emergency procedures. Major Thompson and Captain Williams, the F-22 pilots who had escorted Flight 2156, also attended the ceremony. They were now instructors in Sarah's joint training program, teaching both military and civilian pilots the advanced techniques that had made the rescue possible. Working with Venom during that emergency was a career highlight, Major Thompson said. She showed us that the best military techniques should be available to anyone who needs them to save lives. 5 years after the incident that had blown her cover and changed her life, Major Sarah Venom Blake was selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel and assignment as Director of Advanced Aviation Safety at the Air Force Test Pilot School. Her new position made her responsible for developing and testing emergency procedures that would benefit both military and civilian aviation. The techniques she had pioneered were now standard training for pilots around the world. Lieutenant Colonel Blake has fundamentally changed aviation safety, said NASA Administrator Dr. Patricia Lee during Sarah's promotion ceremony. Her work bridges the gap between experimental aviation and practical emergency procedures. The passengers from Southwest Flight 2156 never forgot the graduate student who had saved their lives. Many of them attended Sarah's promotion ceremony, including David Park, the businessman who had been sitting beside her during the emergency. Major Blake taught me that heroes often disguise themselves as ordinary people, David said during the ceremony. She looked like a tired graduate student, but she was actually one of the most skilled pilots in the world. Today, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Venom Blake continues to serve in the Air Force, now as one of the most influential voices in military and civilian aviation safety. Her techniques are taught at flight schools around the world, and her emergency procedures manual is required reading for pilots in dozens of countries. She occasionally returns to MIT to guest lecture in aerospace engineering classes, where students are amazed to learn that one of their former graduate student colleagues was actually a classified test pilot who had saved 137 lives. The most important lesson from my experience, Sarah tells these students, is that knowledge should be shared when it can save lives. The techniques I learned flying experimental aircraft weren't just military secrets, they were tools that could help anyone who needed them. Her office at Edwards Air Force Base displays a photo from Southwest Flight 2156, not of the emergency landing, but of her sitting in seat 31F with her laptop, looking like any other graduate student working on her dissertation. It serves as a reminder that extraordinary capabilities often hide behind ordinary appearances. The F-22 Raptors that escorted Flight 2156 continue to fly training missions over the southwestern United States. But the pilots who fly them know that one of their most important missions was the day they helped guide a commercial airliner to safety, guided by a test pilot whose call sign represented the deadliest kind of excellence in aviation. In airports around the world, passengers still board aircraft without knowing that their safety depends partly on techniques developed by a woman who once sat in seat 31F, appearing to be just another tired graduate student but actually being one of the most skilled pilots ever to take to the skies. She was just a student at 30,000 feet, wearing torn jeans and working on her dissertation. But when 137 people needed help, Sarah Venom Blake became exactly what she had always been, a pilot whose legendary call sign commanded the respect of F-22 Raptors and whose skills could save anyone brave enough to climb into an aircraft. The secret world of experimental aviation had lost one of its most classified assets. But the world of aviation safety had gained something far more valuable, a teacher whose knowledge could save lives for generations to come. This story explores the hidden world of classified military aviation and demonstrates how the most advanced techniques developed in secret can ultimately serve to save civilian lives, showing that true heroism often hides behind the most ordinary appearances.